Hello there and welcome back to The Closet Historian and back to my sewing room for another project. Now recently I was experimenting with some horizontal style lines, horizontal princess seams as you saw here with this very sparkly sequined cocktail dress that I made. Elevated cocktail even. It's just very, very sparkly. And today I wanted to continue playing with those sort of style lines but on a much more day-wear friendly dress, or day to night at least, because this will still have a little bit of metallic HTV going on. No one's really surprised. And I do want to try out a slightly different skirt style on this design as well, so let's jump on over to the blue patterning table of doom and get started. I begin, as per usual, with a tracing of my basic bodice block, front in this case, and I've drawn a line from the apex up into the shoulder so I can move all my dart fullness up there for now as I draw in my first style line across the bottom half of this pattern. I'll go ahead and tape my darts shut here, moving all that fullness up into the shoulder, and I'll cut off the excess paper just so that it's out of the way, and I'll even tape down my floops as well. I'm actually going to grab the pattern piece from the last dress I made with these style lines. If you haven't seen that video yet, I can put a card up to it here, just because I quite liked this curve, and therefore I will draw in the same exact one through my apex this time as well. The important part here is that the curve goes through the apex, but you can draw in whatever sort of shape you want. The more complex the shape, the more annoying it will be to sew. Just do keep that in mind. And I will go ahead and cut this apart, and now we can see where all that dart fullness is going to go into this style line. And I will close up this temporary dart that we used just to facilitate the drawing of the style line. Close that back up here, like so. So you can see where all that dart fullness is gone along the style line, but I'm going to draw in an additional style line. This one won't be here for fit reasons like that first. This is here just for style reasons. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a 2 3/4 inch width stripe above the first style line here, and you can see it's quite curvy until you start to put a imaginary body in here and it starts to look quite straight. Because the body is not straight across and not like a perfect cylinder or anything, you can't have straight lines and expect them to look straight on the body. So either you can draw the lines straight and they will look curved when you're wearing them, or you can have the curves on the pattern and it will look straight once you have the dress on. Hopefully that makes any sense. But of course with all these style lines going on, I need to add seam allowance, so I'll go ahead and add my 1/2 inch seam allowance on here. Tape everything down, tape down my floops, and we have my front pattern here ready to go. Oh, except for one last thing, I will go ahead and make this a V neckline. I'm going to come out a 1/4 inch along the shoulder seam, and then a 1/2 inch up along here so I have room to sew on my facing later, and it will finish right here where everything meets in the center front. And I will need to trace a facing for that later, but alas, I'm not thinking about it yet, as I go ahead and start in on the back instead. And I want to have the same style lines along the side seam here, so I'm just making sure those will match up. And I'll have the stripe actually go through the point of my dart on the back here. So these are a little bit further down than the curves are in the front, but they still line up at the side seams, which is the most important part. So if I raise my arm, all the stripes will line up along the side seam, underneath, along the side of me, I suppose. A, B, and C here, got my style lines drawn in, and I can go ahead and close up this dart, and the fullness will now be transferred into the style lines, the stripes, back here as well, in a very similar way to how the front was fitted. Of course, the back has less of a curve than the front on my particular pattern, just because of the apex, always the curviest part of my body at least. And once again, I'll cut that apart, add seam allowance, tape down my floops, etc. And then here I will remember to go ahead and trace in a back facing. So just tracing my neckline on the back of the pattern here, making this 2 1/2 inches wide. And I have a front facing sitting here as well now. I can go ahead and draw in this curve, and I'll just finish this neckline with a facing later as opposed to lining this in any way. To maintain that tiny bit of stretch and a little bit of give in the blend of the fabric, I will just go ahead and leave this unlined and just finish any raw edges I need to with either a facing or with bias. And for my sleeve today, I'm going to be doing a very similar sleeve that I used on the other dress. I'm just going to make this far narrower, so it's going to be like thinner and shorter as well. So I'm going to try a smaller and thinner version of this sleeve. I'm only going to make it extend past the center of the sleeve cap 1.5 inches. I'm going to flare it out a 1/2 inch down here at the underarm, and then keep it pretty narrow through the overlap of the tulip of it all, like so. If you've been watching my recent videos, you're going to be very familiar with this tulip sleeve process at this point, but I'll go ahead and overlap my underarm seam closed here, and I've now created this very funky little shape of sleeve here. I will fill in this other side where I need to replicate the first side of the sleeve here, so everything overlaps in the end. Just draw in that curve, sketch that in so I can have it be the same on the front and back. just finished cutting out this very odd little shape of sleeve here. And once again, I will go ahead and draw in some curved lines on either side from the center of each side of the sleeve down to the hem, and then about 1.5 inches over from there. And I'm going to create little pleats in this sleeve as well, just like I've been doing on the other pleated tulip sleeves I've been making recently. Of course, without these pleats, it would just be a nice, smooth, little overlapped sleeve, but this adds a little bit more volume in here, which I do quite like some volume in the cap of a sleeve, as we know. And I've added in about 2-inch pleats here, and I will go ahead and pleat those closed and cut off the excess, and second guess myself along the way here. Come on, kid, you've got it. Needed a little bit more paper here. Just pleat that closed, cut it away, and I have the correct shape for layering these pleats closed later on in the fabric. Of course, always easier to pleat fabric than it is paper, which we will get into a bit more in the skirt here in a second. And then I'll add the same kind of pleating to the other side of my sleeve. And I actually just trimmed off one last little 1/2 inch from the bottom here. Just wanted to make these actually quite a bit shorter than the other sleeves I've been making recently, just to be able to see the difference and see what I liked best. And I was trying to see here if the designs I had drawn onto my bodice pattern were going to work well on the sleeves later as well, which I did end up using them, and you'll see that later on in the HTV portion of this whole situation. But it's time to start working on my skirt pattern here, and I am going to add a yoke along my front and back skirt pattern once again. I'm making this a little bit less curved than last time, so it's the same width along the side seam as it is here at the center front, which does leave me with these tiny dart points here, which I will deal with later. It's just a tiny bit of the end of the dart, probably about 1/4 of an inch of excess nonsense, so easy enough to carve away from other places. But for my yoke here, I can just cut that out, and again, cut along the dart legs and layer this closed so that I can remove the darts along the skirt by adding in a horizontal style line once again, just like I did on the bodice, and just like I did for the first sort of corset-inspired dress, where I was using these same kind of style lines. But add seam allowance to both the yoke and the skirt itself here before I forget. And actually, I'm going to need a full front for the bottom of this. I can cut the yoke on the fold, but this I'm going to actually cut out in a single layer. I'll need 2 pieces in the end, but only a single layer of each, because this is going to be almost a tulip skirt to go with my tulip sleeves here. I'll just fold this along the center front here and draw in the top curve. Try and find some more paper here to fill this in so I can start drawing the curved shape of my skirt. And I wanted to go ahead and narrow this skirt just a little bit here, so I'll bring it in 1 inch on either side, just narrow that to nothing along the, I don't know, bottom of the hip level here. I probably could have brought this up a little bit higher, but I'm not used to working on a skirt pattern that's missing the top 4 or 5 inches, obviously. And I was just trying to decide how far over I wanted this curve to start, and of course my camera cut out. So I drew in the curve, I cut it off. You get the idea. I'll show you how I make the underside, and you'll get an idea of how I did it the first time. So this first piece is going to be my top layer, which I'll be doing a little bit more work to, but I will need an underlayer as well. So while it's all in one piece, I'll go ahead and trace another copy to use as the underlayer, and I will go ahead and take 1/8 of an inch off of either side of this and just ease that in on either side, I guess, or ease that off, just so that I can completely forget about this weird little dart in the center. We don't need that anymore. It's small enough that I can just take that extra excess off the sides and not have to worry about it any longer. But now we can see if I flip that over, I now have this sort of tulip overlapped front skirt. It's sort of a faux wrap skirt, but I don't need the underside of this to be this full, really. For perfect coverage you can, but I want this to actually move apart a little bit while I'm walking and serve as a slit so that if I need to, again, run, if I need to sprint for a train in this dress, as I always say, I'd be able to. Not that I ever plan on doing so, but you get the idea. But I can just take off a little bit of excess here, just draw in a curve so that this still overlaps a good 4.5 inches at the center front, but otherwise it will open up petal-like, just like my tulip sleeves do. And once again, just like my tulip sleeves, I could leave this smooth and finished just like this, or I could add a little bit of extra movement and pleating, which is what I'm going to do here for the top layer of the skirt. I'm going to draw some curved lines into the side seam, up to where the yoke seam will be along this front skirt, and I will slice into those, spread this apart, and add in a good 3 or 4 inches, I think, between each of these, and create some pleats along the front of my skirt. Gives it a bit more of a sarong style, I believe, is usually what we're going to be calling this. Although an actual sarong is, of course, quite a bit different. But I'll just measure out 3 inches here of opening between each of these and fill in this extra space with some spare paper. Lots of spare paper being used today, and therefore lots of tape. But you know, it's good not to waste paper. Paper's expensive, that's right. And to get the correct shape along these pleats up here, because it's quite hard to pleat paper in a curve like this, although fabric, it's not any trouble. You go ahead and connect the 2 points with a straight line, find the center of that line, and put a dot there, and square out from there with a 90-degree angle, and then connect those lines to create these little points past the pleats. Hopefully this makes sense. I have done this in a video before, so hopefully you are following along if you've been here for a while. If you're new here, as I always say, welcome. I am slightly chaotic, I apologize. Cut off my excess here, tape down my floops. I will actually cut an extra 1/2 inch off the hem down here just to make sure it doesn't kick out at all down here where there has been a little bit of excess nonsense going on. And this first pleat here actually will extend past where the skirt will end, so I'll show you how I deal with that later. But this will pleat down and overlap the underlayer like so. So I just need one of each of those again. Just be careful when you're cutting something out that you're cutting out, like you know which pieces you want to cut out with the right side of the fabric up or down. Of course, in cotton sateen, one side is shinier than the other, but otherwise they are very similar looking, so I have to be careful later when I'm cutting mine out. And I can trace a copy of my skirt back as well, and I won't be adding any pleats or any extra nonsense to the back of this, but I will still need my yoke across the top of this. So the same sort of idea, draw in my yoke, make sure it will line up along the side seam. I'll narrow my skirt a little bit here, then I can cut this out, cut the yoke apart, and actually these darts are probably a 1/2 inch each here in the back, so I will actually just leave them right where they are and sew in those tiny darts later. No problem there. Some slim darts to have the correct fit on the back of my skirt. But again, add seam allowance to my yoke after I close the darts, and add seam allowance to the skirt itself, like so. Finish cutting this out, and my skirt back will be ready to go as well. And with all my pattern pieces ready, I can go ahead and cut everything out of the black cotton sateen. Here I'm cutting out that single layer front skirt drape here, making sure I'm paying attention to which way this will go in the end. Not that I really care if my left or my right overlaps. I do not really care. It's rare that I care which side of my asymmetric designs end up like with more fabric or less. It's just not something I'm usually particular about. But at this point, it was time to start the couple days long process of cutting out all the designs I wanted to add from the Oil Slick Effect HTV Soft Metallic. This material is called Soft Metallic. It comes in many different finishes, including 2 different colors of oil slick. And this is the more silvery of the 2. It almost looks a little bit like abalone shell, I think, this one. And then the other is a little bit more saturated and a little bit more gold tone. So you'll see that in a moment as well. For this design that I'm using over the main midsection pieces for the center of my dress, I again used the Frank Lloyd Wright design that I used for the handbag earlier in the year. In fact, I'm making this entire dress to match that handbag that I made earlier in the year because I was just so pleased with how it came out. So I just made large sections of my design of the pattern I wanted here, and then cut them down to fit my actual fabric pieces, as you can see. And for the stripe that goes above that midsection piece, I cut out some sort of topographical marbled print pattern here, and I'm going to again cut it down to fit and try and reserve as much material as I can because I need to use the rest, like the cut off bits of this, to do the back stripes. I didn't have a ton of this oil slick in stock, and I did actually end up running out and having to wait in order to finish this dress to get a couple more sheets of this. I do like, there's 2 different places I've been ordering my HTV from, and they've both been easy to work with, so I can link both of those options below for you if you are interested in this style of heat transfer vinyl, or this style of project, as it were. Of course, I've been experimenting with it quite a lot this year, and I was using a more dense design in the center of the dress, and then for the stripes outward from that, kind of fading into a more sparse design. So for these last pieces at the top of my bodice and onto the skirt later, I'm using actually a hand-drawn, marbled, sort of flowing water design that I drew onto my pieces with a marker, traced into the computer, cleaned up in Photoshop, brought into Silhouette, and then printed out in the oil slick finish. So that is what you are seeing here, and I'm having a whale of a time getting all this soft metallic to stick down onto the sateen. Now it's important to note this material is optimized for going onto t-shirts. So it's supposed to work on cotton, which is great. It does work on cotton and polyester. The only thing you might have trouble with is nylon or on acrylic as well. I think you have to get special stuff to stick to nylon, but other than that, it should be no problem. It's made to stick onto cotton. However, it's made to stick onto cotton jersey, not cotton sateen. So I was having quite a bit of fun making this stick just because I don't have a heat press. So is my iron actually getting hot enough? Hard to say. And also because I'm not pressing down onto a perfectly smooth, perfectly hard surface because my ironing board is kind of crappy as previously established. So I do think I could use an upgraded ironing board to do this properly, and an upgraded iron or just directly a heat press. So it's something I would probably like to invest in the future. They do have like handheld heat presses for doing this at home for crafters, but I'm not really interested in like getting a fancier iron. I'd rather have an iron for doing ironing and a heat press for doing heat press work. So once I'm done investing in a house and mortgage nonsense and moving and all that later this year, I'll start saving up for an actual heat press, I think, just because it'll make my life easier if I continue doing projects like this one. And because this was giving me trouble, it did mean I had to press it more than once. And the more you press this particular material, soft metallic, the less metallic it becomes. So it has a more brushed finish as opposed to a directly super shiny chrome finish. Again, if you press this once on a t-shirt, it'll actually have a very shiny chrome finish and remain stretchy and be totally washable, which is all super cool. But if you press it as many times as I had to get this all on here, and you can see for the center front of this, I actually did mirror this design along the center front, and then I had to fill in a couple of spaces where stuff just didn't want to stick. So I was having a time, but I do think it's worth it in the end, thank goodness, because I really love this oil slick finish, even when it's less shiny after all this pressing. But oof, it was a hassle to get everything on here. Again, the material is not optimized for this fabric, and my setup is not optimized for this material either, to be fair. And for the skirt of this, I didn't design a separate graphic. I just used the same graphics that I did for the bodice and layered them and rearranged them and resized them to create something in Photoshop, and then, again, yes, cut that out in sections, and spent hours ironing everything into place and futzing with it, honestly. But finally, once I had done all my heat transfer vinyl decals, I could go ahead and start sewing this project together, which is going to be the much easier part of the whole situation. Although I do run into some trouble thanks to brain fog later on, which I will show you. But I will sew my back stripes onto the back mid-drift pieces, and I'll do the same for the front here. This long stripe lining up my center front. And we have some weird convex to concave going on here, but just like any princess seam, take your time, make sure everything's easing together. Use as many notches or indications from your pattern as you need to make sure that everything comes out smooth and to your liking. And I, of course, am using a bunch of pins here over this rather circuit board inspired section. Me doing an oil slick cyberpunk inspired dress? Never. I know, it's very surprising. And I do still have those tiny darts to sew onto my back skirt pieces here, so I'll go ahead and transfer those over with my colored pencil from the pattern onto the back of the fabric here. And I'll just pinch and pin these tiny little darts just to ensure the back of my skirt is still fitting smoothly. You could actually just probably ease this much in, like with a little bit of gathering back here if you wanted to, but just to make sure everything stays nice and smooth, and because the darts will hide away and not be seen really in this cotton sateen, I went ahead and just sewed them in. And I will go ahead and stitch those first few seams of my quote-unquote color blocking, if we could call it that. At this point, it's neither texture blocking nor color blocking, it's print blocking, I suppose, or decal blocking. I don't know what to call it. It's just the same technique you would use to color block something, just instead of using color, I'm using pattern. Forgive me. I'm just going to stitch that here on the machine. I do have a size 12 needle here in the machine, and all-purpose Gutermann thread here in black. No one is surprised. Do I go through a lot of black Gutermann thread? You better believe it. I should buy a case, honestly. It'd be a good investment for me. I'll go ahead and press my darts towards the center back on those little skirt pieces and start ironing the seams of my style lines. These are quite curvy, so I went ahead and clipped these seams. And then to press these open, I did actually use a piece of muslin as a press cloth, just that I didn't melt any more of this HTV onto my iron, or, you know, trying to preserve both the HTV and my iron, honestly, so that they would get along, using this layer of muslin as a bit of a guard between me and the metallic goop. Because this stuff actually melts into like almost a paint. There are some HTVs that are like a very, very thin layer of plastic with a very thin layer of glue. This soft metallic is not plasticky at all once it's finished. It's a very soft finish because it kind of just turns into paint once you get it warm. It's almost like, I don't know, a very thin layer of fabric paint, think of it like that, as opposed to a very thin layer of plastic. So that's good and bad. Each has an application that I think would work well for it, but the more robust, plasticky kind of HTV actually does not come in the oil slick finish. So we can see why I chose this one. With a design like this one, where it is rather on the like small side, I do think you could get away with using the more plasticky type of material, but it just doesn't come in this oil slick finish, and we know that's what I'm after. I want to look like an elegant oil spill in the backstreets of cyberpunk. Again, we've gone over this. But once I had my style lines clipped and pressed, I did go ahead and top stitch those as well, just to make sure those stay flat and hold smoothly in place. And with the stripe onto my midsection for the backs here, I can go ahead and pin the last more shouldery bits of the bodice back onto the rest here. And you can see kind of what I mean about having a dense design at the waist and then having the next design a little bit more sparse, and then the most sparse of all with that sort of watery smoke kind of effect that I drew by hand. It looks a little bit hand-drawn because I drew it by hand. That's right. It went through several steps between when I drew it onto the pattern piece and when I finished the dress, but that's all right. Stitch those, clip those seams, press everything open with a press cloth again, same set of operations here, and I will of course top stitch this section again on either side as well. Same sort of operations for the front here, just all the way across as opposed to doing a half of a bodice like I do on the back, because of course I will have a center back zipper in this. A center back lapped zipper. Me. I know, I'm a very predictable creature. I will say, in general, when I was working with the flock material earlier in the year, that purple dress I made with the red flock, that flock stuck a lot easier and a lot better to the cotton sateen. So if you're looking for something that is low hassle, the flock definitely works, no problem. This soft metallic is a little bit annoying. I do have a couple other different types of HTV here in the studio that I want to try, so I'll let you know what works best as I go along here. And after I had most of the bodice together, I went ahead and made a fundamental mistake, which will cause me hassle for the rest of this entire project, and that is right here I'm sewing the back skirt pieces onto the back yoke pieces. No, I shouldn't have done this. I should have sewn the yoke pieces side seams and the skirt side seams first and then sewn these together later, because I actually have to have that front overlap of the skirt, the overlap and the underlap. I have to have those hemmed before I can sew the front yokes on. So order of operations wise, I needed to sew the large bottom half of the skirts pieces together along the side seam and along the center back, even below where the zipper will be, before I put on the yokes. So you'll see how that affects things as we go along here. Everything is fine in the end, it just meant it was more annoying for me because I kind of had to hem this skirt in stages, like a fool. But I just used my pattern as a reference, putting pins into my piece of fabric here to see where I needed to pleat this down. And again, you can see this last pleat extends past seam, so I actually am just going to sew this shut and actually serge this area here and cut off the excess so that this doesn't stick out past the edge of the skirt here. But I do need to start hemming this before I can put the yokes on. So I'm going to hem down to the other side seam and then leave the last few inches free because I need to sew that side seam before I can finish hemming it, of course. What a fool. Just proof that I too am a goober. I would like to just blame PMDD for this because I can, but also I think, you know, sometimes I'm sewing faster than my brain can think through the process, which is unfortunate. My engineering is not quite keeping up with my creativity, which is an occasional problem I run into here in the sewing room. But I will clip my curves. I'm hemming this, of course, with bias tape. This is actually cotton broadcloth from Joanne's quilting section that I'm using to hem this because I was going to start hemming it with some silk I had already cut into bias, and then I realized if I hemmed it with silk, then this would no longer be washable. And the cotton sateen and the HTV are all washable, so in order to keep this a washable dress, I needed a washable hem tape here, as it were. So I ran to Joanne's and got some black broadcloth real fast. Not my favorite activity to do, not my favorite place to shop, but when I need something within a couple of hours, it is the only answer available to me. So there's that. So I hemmed the crossovers in the front here so that I could layer my skirt, like my tulip skirt, basically closed, and sew that to the front yoke like so. Again, how I didn't realize I was going to have that edge hemmed before I did this, I do not know. But now I have like some extra bias tape just hanging off my hem right now because I'm going to need to continue the bias all the way around the hem later once this is sewn along the side seams. For those of you who have made a lot of things, you're keeping up with me and why I did the order of operations wrong. Most of you are probably like, what? Which Only if you were trying this and trying to follow my mistake would you understand the true pain of what I've done to myself here. It's not a fatal mistake, at least, which after all that HTV, thank goodness, but it is an irritating one, at least. But here I am, stitching on my front yoke. I will again clip this curve, press everything open with a press cloth, and again top stitch this so that everything lies nice and smooth and feels relatively finished along the inside. I did actually receive a new type of HTV in the mail today, a glossy black vinyl that I will be trying on black sateen. Shocking, I know. Let's just say I had a lot of black sateen here in the studio for a project that never came to fruition, and I needed to put it to good use. So we have this and another HTV project that will be coming in the future, but I'll be using a glossy finish vinyl, and hopefully that sticks well. I'm about to find out tomorrow. Cross your fingers for me, you know? But because I had sewn the back yokes to the back skirt pieces first out of everything for the skirt here, I can now go ahead and lay those on the side seams of the front, now that the front is together, and stitch these down along the side seams to the hem, where this hem tape, again, yes, is just chillin'. You can see this bias tape on the side of the screen here. It's just loose, hanging there, because I've hemmed part of the front of the skirt, and once I have my side seams and my back seam together, I'll be able to hem the rest of the skirt. What a wild idea. Yes, the other side here, same exact way. Line up along the yoke. Again, I should have sewn the yoke side seams and the skirt side seams, and then sewn the yoke seam all as one, fronts and backs together. Hopefully I can make another dress like this sometime and show you how to do it properly, because this is just not the right order to be doing things in. Alright, get that bias tape out of the way. Thank you. One last seam to sew before I can actually finish this hem off with that tape that's just hanging out here, and that is the center back seam. And again, I'm not going to leave a slit in this because I have that overlap in the front that will facilitate walking no problem. So I'm just going to sew from where the zipper will end down to the hem, press that open. Of course, we have that wider 1 inch seam allowance back here, like I like to keep for when I have an area a zipper is going in. And then now, finally, since the rest of my skirt is together, I can finish hemming this with this tape that's just hanging off here awkwardly. I'm just going to machine stitch that onto the right side, press that to the inside, clip my curves where needed, smooth everything off with the iron, pin into place, and then hand stitch this hem down like I normally do when hemming with bias. I simply just added on some extra nonsense for myself this time. And I'll just cut some slightly narrower bias out of that same fabric to go ahead and hem my sleeves as well, because I won't be lining these today, and I need to finish this curved edge somehow, and hemming it would be irritating, so might as well use bias. Anytime I have a curved hem, I use bias. It's just so much easier than trying to turn things twice when you have anything this curvy, and these sleeves are quite curvy, as we can see. So I'll stitch that on, again, right sides together, along my hem, turn everything to the inside, clip curves where needed, press everything smooth, and hand stitch this into place. Just be careful if you're ever using this kind of soft metallic material like I am, that you don't hit it directly with your iron after it's already on there, because you will just melt that stuff completely. It'll stick to your iron and it will become a mess. So just be careful never to hit that directly with the metal plate of the iron. You'll learn the hard way, but it wouldn't be fun. And it does mean I have to be careful when I'm ironing this dress later after wearing it, you know. Probably would iron it with a press cloth and or just steam the darn thing. You know, have it hanging from the shower while you take a hot shower, and it might just steam out enough to wear. You know what I mean? And with my skirt together and my sleeves prepped, I can actually sew my side seams of the bodice and the shoulder seams as well. So I can actually have a finished bodice to put those sleeves into in a moment here. I will sew my facings together along the shoulder seams as well, so I can finish the neckline. Finishing both the skirt off and the bodice off before I connect them. Why the heck not? Again, using that press cloth to press open my side seam here, Hopefully you can't hear this in the background, but outside my window there's an angry bird yelling outside. So if you hear any screeching in the background, I don't know what the bird situation is. I guess it's almost spring, technically. It is spring, I guess, according to the calendar, and therefore there's some screeching happening. I don't know what that's about. I'm going to grab my sleeve pattern piece here, and again, just use pins to mark where my pleats need to go, and go ahead and pleat the extra fullness down into place. I can go ahead and do a little bit of basting over these areas, over each sleeve cap to hold these into place before I set this into the garment itself, just so I don't have to worry about these pleats coming undone while I'm doing that. And I'll press open the shoulder seams for my facing as well. Then I will go ahead and draw in my seam allowance for the V-neck here using a white gel pen, and then realize that that V actually comes down lower than I thought it would into the stripe on the front here. So I could either have the V come a little bit lower into that stripe, or I can have it finish where I want and have a narrower seam allowance, so that is what I'm going to do. The shot will get very blurry in a moment here after I realize this, but don't worry, I'll fix it. 3, 2, 1. There we go. So yes, I'm going to have a narrower seam allowance right here at the V, just so it ends exactly where I want to. Again, why I didn't notice this in the pattern drafting stage, no one is quite certain. It was quite a bad PMDD month, but it does seem rude to just blame the chemicals. Can I blame my hormones for everything? Please? You'd mess up little things too if you didn't have any serotonin, alright? Okay, clip that V, clip the curves here along the neckline, give that a quick little bit of a press before I go ahead and put some understitching along this as well, just to hold this facing into place. Looking good so far. Let's go ahead and put some understitching in here just to hold everything into place and nice and smooth. And then I can tack the facing down to the shoulder seams and along some of the seam allowance at the front just to make sure it stays in place. And tacking this down along the inside really helps when you go to wash this dress later, so that things aren't just flooping around wildly in there. They're at least tacked down into place, so when you go to press it again, everything is at least in the general area it needs to be. Like so, and then I can go ahead and set my sleeves in on either side, match up the underarm seam with the side seam here. Well, there's not an underarm seam, but where the underarm seam would be on this pattern, which is of course layered closed, because it overlaps at the top here over the sleeve cap next to the shoulder seam instead. And make sure you're pinning the side that you want to be on the top of your sleeve first, and then underlap the underlayer underneath that. Hopefully that makes sense. Hard to keep these things straight. As long as it's the same on either side, I suppose it doesn't matter. And especially if you're doing a very asymmetric design, heck, it might not matter if it's different on each side. It's a bit of visual interest. It's one of those things where, as long as you're doing it intentionally or pretending you are, I think it works. And with my sleeves set in, my skirt and my bodice both constructed, I can go ahead and sew these together along the waist seam. I'll line up the center front and line up the side seams, and then pin in between, again, pinning anchor points and then pinning in between those, just making sure everything lines up like it's supposed to, where it's supposed to, easing in anything if it's stretched a tiny bit. No problems, of course, here in the cotton sateen. And once I have that sewn, I can go ahead and press that open. Again, sometimes this is curvy enough to require needing a few clips. Here in the cotton sateen, it's got a little bit of a stretch to it, so I'm not worried about clipping the waist seam. It's a seam that gets a little bit of stress, so I'd rather just not clip it if I can get away with it. And with this particular fabric, I know that I can. And I'll go ahead and press the rest of my 1-inch seam allowance along the center back open here, just so I can set my zipper in. Again, doing a lap zipper as always. And because my skirt for this is already hemmed and my sleeves are already hemmed, putting in the zipper is actually my very last step for this. So I will go ahead and set in my overlapped zipper here, tack down the facings, sew in a little hook and eye at the very top here, and with that, this dress will at long last be finished and ready to wear. here is my finished oil slick, color blocked, texture blocked, design blocked dress here. It's not really color blocked, but you could use this to make a color block dress, the same techniques. Of course, I'm not using different colors, I'm using different patterns of weird oil slick metallic HTV, which of course I was using today to match this little handbag that I made earlier in the year. I'm super pleased with how this dress came out, and thank goodness too, because it was quite the hassle to get this HTV stuff to stick onto this cotton sateen. It's not really made to stick onto cotton sateen. It's made for, like I said, t-shirt fabric, so it's not the most ideal application. It does work, it just takes a little bit of extra patience. And I may end up investing in a heat press somewhere down along the line here, but of course I have a lot of other things to invest in first, so we'll see how that goes. In any case, I hope you enjoyed seeing how this project came together today, and thank you as always for watching. I'll be back here with more sewing, vintage fashion, costuming, and crafting real soon, so I'll see you then. Bye!